Cold rain lashed against the obsidian gates of Ironhold Fortress, but the chill outside was nothing compared to the ice in Isolde's veins. Heavy iron chains bit into her wrists, binding her hands behind her back as her stepmother, Lady Morwenna, shoved her onto the slick stone floor of the great hall. "I bring you the black stain of the silver pine pack, your grace." Morwenna's screech echoed off the vaulted stone pillars, dripping with manufactured grief. Isolde Vance, thief, traitor, and murderer of her own father's legacy. As punishment for her crimes against our bloodline, I surrender her completely to your absolute judgment. Isolde forced herself up from her knees, ignoring the sting of scraped skin beneath her threadbare dress. She lifted her chin, meeting the gaze of the towering figure seated upon the high throne, Alpha King Kalen. Bloodfang sat shrouded in the shadows of the dais. He was a creature of myth and terror across the northern territories, a monarch who had unified 7 warring wolf packs through sheer, brutal dominance. His broad shoulders were draped in heavy winter furs, and his silver hair gleamed under the torchlight like forged steel. But it was his eyes that froze the breath in Isolde's throat, piercing, molten amber, holding an intensity so vast it felt like a physical weight pressing against her chest. "A traitor, you say?" Kalen's voice was a low, resonant growl that vibrated through the flagstones. He did not move, yet the entire hall grew dead silent. "Your late husband was my ally, Lady Morwenna. You claim his only biological daughter attempted to sell your pack's defense maps to southern rogues. She was caught red-handed in the archives, Alpha King," Morwenna insisted, her face flushed with deceptive zeal. Beside her stood her biological daughter, Cynthia, wearing a sly, triumphant smile. "She deserves execution, but in respect for the peace treaty between our lands, I give her to you as a bound serf. Lock her in your deepest dark dungeons. Break her spirit until she rots." Isolde's teeth bit into her lower lip until she tasted copper. The truth burned in her throat. That Morwenna had poisoned Isolde's father 6 months ago, framed Isolde to steal her rightful birthright, and sold off the Silver Pine territory to corrupt merchants. But Isolde knew that shouting accusations in the court of a feared foreign king would only look like the desperate squawking of a condemned criminal. "Is this true, girl?" Kalen asked softly. He stood up from his throne, his giant muscular frame casting a terrifying silhouette against the hearth fire. Every step he took down the dais felt like a thunderclap. He stopped directly in front of Isolde. The scent of ozone, cedarwood, and rain washed over her, an overwhelmingly potent alpha aura that forced 3 of Morwenna's guards to drop to one knee in instinctual submission. But Isolde held her ground. She refused to bow her head. "I did not betray my father, your grace," Isolde said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "And I did not steal. My stepmother offers me to you not as justice, but to hide her own treason beneath your shadows." Morwenna gasped dramatically. "You dare lie to the king!" Silence!" Kalen snapped, without even looking at Morwenna. The Alpha King leaned down, his amber eyes locked onto Isolde's dark blue ones. For a fraction of a second, his pupils dilated so wildly that the gold nearly swallowed the black. A subtle, dangerous shudder passed through his jaw. He reached out a broad, leather-gloved hand and grabbed the heavy iron chains linking her wrists. With a single, effortless twist of his bare hands, the cold iron snapped in two. The clatter of broken links echoed through the hall. Morwenna blinked, stunned. "Your Grace, she is to be cast into the dungeon." "You handed her to me as absolute punishment, Lady Morwenna," Kalen growled, turning his terrifying gaze back to the stepmother. "By pack law, her fate belongs entirely to me now. You have surrendered all rights to Isolde Vance." Yes, of course," Morwenna stammered, taking a step back from his dark aura. "She is your prisoner to destroy." "She is my charge," Kalen corrected coldly. He stepped closer to Isolde, grabbing her elbow with a firm, surprisingly warm grip. "Guard Commander Vane, escort Lady Morwenna and her daughter out of my lands immediately. If they step foot within Ironhold territory again before the full moon, execute them for trespassing." Cynthia gasped, and Morwenna's face turned pale white. "What? But—" Before the stepmother could protest further, armed royal guards surrounded them, forcing them toward the heavy double doors. Isolde stood frozen, her wrists burning where the iron had rubbed them raw. She looked up at the fearsome Alpha King, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Why had he banished her stepmother so abruptly? What game was he playing? Kaelin leaned down until his lips were inches from her ear. His hot breath brushed her skin, sending an unexpected spark of electricity racing straight down her spine. "Welcome to Ironhold, Isolde," he whispered, his voice dark and brimming with a strange, possessive heat that made her blood run wild. "Your stepmother thought she was condemning you to hell. She has no idea what she has just unleashed." The high sun tower of Ironhold was far from the damp, windowless dungeon Isolde had prepared herself for. The room was expansive, furnished with plush silk tapestries, a roaring stone fireplace, and a massive arched window overlooking the jagged peaks of the northern mountain range. Yet it was still a cage. Outside the heavy oak door stood two massive alpha guards wearing the silver crest of the House of Bloodfang. For 2 days, Isolde had been kept inside this room. She was brought fresh food, warm baths, and fine wool dresses, but no answers. Isolde paced the length of the oriental rug, her mind racing. She was no delicate princess. Before her father's death, she had spent years learning herbal medicine, territory mapping, and pack politics. She knew that in a wolf court, unexplained kindness was often far more dangerous than open hostility. "If he thinks I will sit here like a helpless trophy while Morwenna destroys my homeland, he is mistaken," Isolde muttered to herself. She walked over to the stone vanity, slipping a small, sharp bronze hairpin into her sleeve. If Alpha King Kaelin intended to use her as a pawn in some grand political game, she needed leverage. The heavy door creaked open, and Kaelin stepped into the chamber. He had discarded his royal court furs, wearing only a dark leather tunic that accentuated his broad chest and powerful arms. The fierce scar running along his left jawline gave him a rugged, ruthless appearance, yet his movements were unnaturally smooth, like a predator stalking its territory. Isolde immediately stepped back, her hand surreptitiously slipping into her sleeve to grip the bronze pin. "Your Grace, am I a guest, or am I a trophy you bought from my stepmother?" Kaelin halted, his amber eyes tracking her subtle movement toward her sleeve. A ghost of a smirk touched his lips. "You hold a hairpin like a dagger, little bird, but your stance is weak, your center of gravity is too high." Isolde flushed with anger. "Do not mock me. You claimed my fate in front of the entire court. If you intend to execute me or force me into servitude, do it now. Stop playing these mind games." Kaelin's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of grim solemnity. He closed the distance between them with slow, deliberate steps. Isolde held her ground, refusing to retreat even when his towering frame overshadowed her completely. "I do not execute innocent women, Isolde," Kaelin said softly, his voice dropping an octave. "And I certainly do not take orders from a viper like Morwenna." "Innocent?" Isolde questioned, her eyes narrowing. "You don't even know me. You heard her accusations." "I knew your father," Kaelin replied. He reached into his leather tunic and pulled out a rolled parchment sealed with black wax and a silver tree stamp, her father's personal seal. Lord Vance was a wise man. 3 months before he passed, he sent a secret courier to Ironhold. He knew Morwenna was poisoning him. Isolde's breath hitched in her throat. Her hand dropped from her sleeve as shock washed over her. "What?" He knew he couldn't survive her political web in the south. Kaelin continued, stepping closer and placing the scroll into her trembling hands. "So he made a secret blood pact with me. If anything happened to him, and if Morwenna ever tried to eliminate you, I was bound by honor and ancient law to protect the true bloodline of the Silver Pine." Isolde unrolled the scroll with shaky fingers. The handwriting was unmistakably her father's, precise and elegant. The bottom carried 2 dried blood stains, her father's and Kaelin's. "To Alpha King Kaelin, protect my daughter Isolde. She carries the true strength of our ancestors. Should my life be cut short, I betroth her to the throne of Ironhold, so long as she wills it. Isolde's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. Betrothed? My father, he arranged a marriage. He sought to ensure your safety, Kaelin said, his amber eyes burning with an intense, unreadable emotion. Morwenna thought she was punishing you by handing you over to the feared Alpha King. She didn't realize she was walking right into your father's final trap. And you, Isolde challenged, her heart hammering against her ribs. You expect me to simply accept this? To hide behind your throne while Morwenna rules my people? I expect you to stand beside me, Kaelin said fiercely, taking a step so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. Not behind me. Together we can tear Morwenna's corrupt council to pieces. Before Isolde could process his words, a deafening explosion shattered the quiet of the afternoon. The floor beneath them violently shuddered. Screams echoing from the lower courtyards filled the air, followed immediately by the loud, shrill blare of warning horns. Kaelin's wolf instincts flared instantly. His eyes flashed a terrifying, incandescent gold. He shielded Isolde with his body as stone dust rained down from the ceiling. The heavy door burst open, and Commander Vane rushed inside, his broadsword drawn and splattered with fresh blood. Your Grace, the Eastern Armory has been detonated, Vane yelled, his eyes darting suspiciously toward Isolde. The saboteurs breached the inner guard using a high-level security key, and we found this at the scene of the breach. Vane thrust a piece of torn black silk forward. Stamped upon it in crimson ink was Isolde's private noble sigil, a silver pine needle intertwined with a crescent moon. Vane pointed his bloody sword directly at Isolde's heart. Sire, the prisoner is a spy! She engineered an attack on Ironhold! Lower your steel, Vane! Kaelin's voice thundered, echoing through the stone tower like a crack of lightning. He stepped directly between the commander's blade and Isolde, his massive frame shielding her completely. My lord, look at the evidence, Vane demanded, his face tight with fury and betrayal. The Eastern Armory contains half our winter supply of firestone. 3 guards are dead. The breach was made using royal clearance codes, and her personal crest was left on the detonator. I haven't left this tower in 2 days, Isolde shouted, pushing past Kaelin's arm so she could face the commander directly. How could I possibly access your armory or plant explosives when I am guarded night and day by your own elite soldiers? You could have planted sleeper agents before you arrived, Vane countered, his hand trembling on the hilt of his sword. Or used dark magic. The Council of Elders is already gathering in the Great Hall. They are calling for your head, girl. Isolde felt a cold sweat break out on her neck. Morwenna's trap was far deeper than she had imagined. Her stepmother hadn't just given her to Kaelin to get rid of her. She had engineered a secondary attack on Ironhold using Isolde's stolen crest to provoke the High Wolf Council into executing her immediately. That way, Kaelin couldn't protect her without risking a civil war within his own pack. Kaelin, Isolde said, turning to the Alpha King. She used his name without his royal title for the first time, her voice sharp and focused. Think, if I wanted to destroy Ironhold, why would I use my own personal sigil on the evidence? Who leaves their own name at the scene of a treasonous crime? Kaelin's amber eyes narrowed as he analyzed her words. A frame job, designed to force my hand before the elders. Precisely, Isolde said, stepping closer to Vane and gesturing toward the torn black silk. Look at the ink on that crest. That is sunroot dye. It is native only to the southern marshes of my home pack, but it degrades within 48 hours of exposure to frost. Ironhold is in the freezing north. If that silk had been carried through your gates today, the ink would be cracked and faded. That crest was stamped inside this fortress using stored ink. Vane blinked, looking down at the crisp, unfaded red ink on the fabric. A flicker of hesitation crossed the veteran commander's eyes. She speaks the truth about the ink, Vane, Kaelin said coldly. There is a mole in our internal council, even if that is true, sire, Vane said, lowering his sword slightly. The Council of Elders does not care about chemical nuances. Blood has been spilled on Ironhold ground. The Elders are invoking the ancient code. If you refuse to execute her, they will view it as a betrayal of the pack blood. They will challenge your crown. 10 minutes later, Isolde found herself standing before the High Council of Elders in the dark subterranean chamber beneath the keep. 6 ancient battle-scarred wolf elders sat upon high stone benches, their faces grim and unyielding. Surrounding them were dozens of pack lords, murmuring venomously. Elder Torin, a grizzled old wolf with an eye patch, slammed his heavy iron staff against the floor. "Alpha King Kalen, the evidence of treason is clear. The girl's crest was found at the site of our dead warriors. We demand she be cast into the pit or executed at dawn." "She is innocent of this attack." Kalen's voice echoed across the cavernous room, demanding absolute silence. "The evidence was planted by an internal traitor seeking to divide our pack. You defend a foreign outcast while our brother's blood is still warm?" Torin spat back, his pride wounded. "If you refuse to execute her under pack law, then she must prove her innocence before the gods. We demand the trial of the Frostwood." A collective gasp rippled through the gathered lords. Isolde's heart sank. She knew of the Frostwood. It was a vast, deadly expanse of enchanted forest north of the keep, infested with wild shadow beasts and lethal magical anomalies. The accused traitor was stripped of weapons and forced to survive in the forest for 3 days. No one had ever survived the Frostwood without an Alpha's mark or divine intervention. It was a slow execution masked as a trial. "She is human-blooded on her mother's side," Kalen growled, his fists clenching so hard his knuckles turned white. "Sending her into the Frostwood alone is a death sentence." "That is the law of the pack," Torin yelled back. "Unless a royal warrior stakes his own life to fight by her side." "Then it is settled," Kalen declared instantly, his voice echoing with absolute, unquestionable authority. The entire hall fell dead silent. Even Elder Torin looked stunned. Isolde turned to Kalen, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. "Kalen, no! You can't—" Kalen stepped down from the platform, walking directly over to Isolde. Before the shocked eyes of his entire council, he reached out and gently took her face in his broad hands. His touch was warm, protective, and unmistakably fierce. "Under the ancient code, I claim the right of champion," Kalen announced. His golden eyes locked onto Isolde's stunned face. "I will enter the Frostwood at her side. If she dies, I forfeit my crown. If she lives, her innocence is absolute, and anyone who speaks against her will answer to my blade." Isolde stared into his fiery amber eyes, overwhelmed by the terrifying weight of his sacrifice. He was the feared king of the North, risking his throne, his life, and his reputation for a woman he had met 3 days ago. And in that blazing, possessive gaze, Isolde realized the terrifying truth. Alpha King Kalen Bloodfang was not just protecting his ally's daughter. He was bound to her by something far deeper, far darker, and infinitely more dangerous than an ancient scroll. The massive iron gates of Ironhold Fortress slammed shut behind them with a hollow, echoing clang that reverberated through the frozen canyon like the tolling of a death knell. Beyond the outer courtyard wall lay the Frostwood, a vast, ancient, and terrifying wilderness shrouded in perpetual white mist and heavy twilight. The trees here were giant white oaks whose gnarled, calcified bark resembled weathered bone, their canopy so thick that daylight filtered through as a sickly, translucent gray shadow. Isolde pulled her heavy fur cloak tighter around her chest, her boots crunching into the knee-deep snowdrifts. Beside her, Kalen moved with the silent, fluid grace of an apex predator. He had stripped away his heavy royal robes in favor of dark leather armor reinforced with silver mail, a broadsword strapped across his back. His golden eyes swept the tree line continuously, every nerve tuned to the subtle, unnatural shifts in the freezing wind. "The border magic begins 50 paces ahead," Kalen said, his low, resonant voice cutting through the eerie stillness of the forest. "Once we cross the boundary stream, the Frostwood shifts. Space and time do not operate normally within these woods. The forest is ancient, Isolde. It feeds on doubt, fear, and weakness." Isolde stopped in the snow, turning to face him directly. The frigid air turned her breath into pale, swirling clouds. "You did not have to do this, Kalen. Staking your crown, your life, and your entire reputation for a woman you barely know is madness. If we perish out here, Morwenna wins. The traitor lurking within your own high council wins. Kalen paused in his tracks, turning his terrifyingly beautiful gaze upon her. He stepped closer, closing the distance until the sheer warmth radiating from his body cut through the freezing chill between them. Reaching out with a gloved hand, his fingers gently brushed a stray, dark lock of hair from her cold cheek. "Do you truly believe I did this merely out of duty to a signed parchment, Isolde?" His voice dropped to a fierce, gravelly whisper that vibrated deep within his chest. "The moment Morwenna dragged you into my hall in heavy iron chains, my wolf roared for blood. Not because of a betrothal treaty, but because when I looked into your eyes, I saw who you were. You are no helpless victim. You are the only person in this realm who has ever met my gaze without flinching." Isolde's breath caught in her throat. The intensity in his amber eyes was almost overwhelming. A raw, possessive heat that defied the freezing realm surrounding them. Before she could find her voice to answer, a low, guttural growl vibrated through the mist beneath their feet. The snow shivered. "Behind me!" Kalen commanded instantly, drawing his broadsword with a sharp shing of polished steel. Out from the misty shadows between the bone-white trees lunged three monstrous forms. They were shadow beasts. Corrupted, oversized wolves with skin like obsidian, glowing crimson eyes, and jaws dripping with corrosive, dark foam. Kalen moved like lightning. With a brutal, fluid sweep of his blade, he severed the head of the first beast in midair, black, foul blood spraying across the pristine white snow. The second beast, however, circled wide around his line of sight, leaping toward Kalen's exposed left flank while his sword was committed. "Kalen left!" Isolde shouted. Rather than cowering behind him, Isolde reached down and snatched a heavy, ice-coated oak branch from a nearby drift. As the second beast sprang into the air, she drove the jagged, frozen tip directly into the creature's eye socket. The shadow beast shrieked in agony, tumbling hard onto the frozen earth. Kalen did not hesitate. He spun on his heel and impaled his blade directly through the monster's heart. The third beast hesitated, sniffing the blood-soaked air, then retreated backward into the thick fog with a low whine. Isolde stood panting, her chest heaving as her trembling hands let go of the shattered branch. She wiped a smudge of soot from her forehead and looked down at the dead shadow beast at Kalen's feet, and suddenly froze. Tangled beneath the beast's thick fur was a heavy leather harness fitted with an iron control medallion. Stamped into the cold metal was not a wild monster mark, but a refined royal sigil, a broken crown over an oak leaf. Isolde dropped to one knee in the snow, pointing at the emblem. "Look at this. Shadow beasts are wild, corrupted creatures. They do not wear forged iron control harnesses. Someone deliberately captured, trained, and released these beasts at the forest entrance." Kalen leaned down, his face darkening into a mask of pure, murderous fury as he recognized the crest. "That is the personal crest of Elder Torin's noble house." Isolde met Kalen's gaze, the horrifying truth sinking in. The trial of the Frostwood was never meant to be a test of divine judgment. Elder Torin sent us in here to be murdered so it would look like a tragic accident of the wilderness. Before Kalen could answer, the temperature plummeted drastically. The gentle wind turned into a howling, unnatural blizzard, blinding their vision as distant, monstrous howls echoed from every direction. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Snow. A violent frost blizzard swept across the northern ridge of the forest by nightfall, reducing visibility to less than 3 paces. The howling wind carried an unnatural, freezing bite that threatened to numb Isolde's limbs despite her heavy wool cloak. Kalen guided her through the whiteout into a hidden cavern cut deep into the side of a sheer granite cliff, an ancient wolf sanctuary marked by faded, glowing runes carved into the rock face. Inside, the air was dry and shielded from the screaming gale. Kalen immediately set to work lighting a fire using dry birch bark and spark stones. But as the firelight illuminated his face, Isolde noticed a subtle, dangerous tremor in his hands. His jaw was clenched tight, and sweat stood out on his pale brow despite the bitter cold. "Kalen?" Isolde asked, rushing to his side. "You're hurt." It is nothing. Kaelin gritted out through clenched teeth, leaning back against the cold stone wall. Do not lie to me, Isolde demanded. She gently unbuckled his leather pauldrons and pulled aside his torn tunic. Beneath it, 3 deep black lacerations ran across his shoulder blade. The shadow beast's claws had grazed him during the ambush. The flesh around the wound was turning a sickening shade of dark violet, black veins spreading outward like spiderwebs. Shadow poison, Kaelin growled softly, his eyelids fluttering as fever began to take hold. It slows a werewolf's natural healing ability, corrupts the blood from within. Stay still, Isolde commanded, her voice dropping into the firm, authoritative tone of a trained healer. She unbuckled her travel pouch, pulling out her small kit of rare herbs and dried roots. Knowledge passed down to her by her late mother. I need to draw the poison out before it reaches your heart. She crushed dried silver leaf and winter moss between 2 flat stones, mixing the powder with a splash of clean snow water to create a potent poultice. When she applied the dark mixture directly to his open wound, Kaelin let out a low, agonizing groan. His fingers gripping the stone floor so hard the rock cracked beneath his knuckles. Instinctively, Isolde leaned over him, using her free hand to cradle his damp face, pressing her thumb gently against his cheekbone to anchor him. Look at me, Kaelin. Stay with me. Focus on my voice. Kaelin opened his eyes. The amber in his gaze was hazy with pain, but as he locked eyes with her, a profound, eerie stillness settled over his body. His large, calloused hand rose and wrapped gently around her wrist, his thumb tracing the quick, erratic pulse in her neck. My wolf recognizes you, Isolde, he rasped, his breath hot against her skin. It isn't merely that you are brave or clever. Years ago, when your father and I signed our initial pact, he showed me a small portrait of his daughter. I thought it was political maneuvering, but when I saw you step into my hall in chains, my wolf knew you were mine, my true mate. Isolde's heart gave a violent thud against her ribs. In the wolf realm, a true mate bond was sacred, an undeniable soul connection ordained by the moon itself, far rarer than royal titles or arranged marriages. You knew? Isolde whispered, her emotions swirling in a tempest of confusion, fear, and undeniable warmth. And you didn't force the claim upon me? A mate is not a prize to be claimed by royal decree, Kaelin said fiercely, despite his weakening pulse. I wanted you to choose me freely. I wanted to earn your trust, even if I had to burn down half the northern realm to give you justice. Tears pricked the corners of Isolde's eyes. All her life, she had been treated as a bargaining chip. By her stepmother, by her father's corrupt council, by neighboring lords. But here was the most feared monarch in the realm, laying his vulnerability and heart squarely in her hands. As the herbal poultice drew out the black poison, turning the dark veins clear again, Kaelin's breathing stabilized. He closed his eyes to rest, his hand still firmly holding hers. While Kaelin slept, Isolde walked toward the rear of the cavern to gather dry wood. As her torchlight illuminated the back wall, she stopped in her tracks. Engraved deep into the granite was an ancient crest showing a silver pine tree intertwined with a crescent moon, the exact heirloom sigil of her mother's family. But below the crest were royal runes reserved exclusively for the first Alpha King who had unified the packs centuries ago. Isolde brushed her fingers against the cold stone, reading the ancient scripture aloud. Her eyes widened as the realization hit her like a thunderbolt. Her mother was not a common human outcast. She was the last direct blood descendant of the first Alpha King. Morwenna hadn't just framed Isolde to steal her father's lands. Morwenna knew Isolde's true bloodline, a lineage that held absolute legal authority over both the Silver Pine and Ironhold territories. By the morning of the 3rd day, the frost blizzard had broken, leaving the frostwood bathed in cold, brilliant sunlight. Kaelin had fully recovered thanks to Isolde's treatment, his alpha strength restored to its formidable peak. Together, they reached the northern clearing near the tree line, the final boundary marker of the Frostwood trial. Beyond the valley, The high black towers of Ironhold stood outlined against the winter sky. "Once we step across that boundary river, the trial is legally complete," Kaelin said, examining the snowy landscape with practiced eyes. "By ancient law, Elder Torin will have no choice but to drop all charges and yield to my authority." "He won't wait for us to cross," Isolde said, her blue eyes scanning the high ridgeline above the narrow mountain pass. She pointed to subtle disturbances in the high snowdrifts along the cliff edge. "Look at the wind patterns. Snow does not pack down like that naturally. There are warriors waiting in ambush above the pass." Kaelin's eyes narrowed as his sharp wolf senses confirmed her suspicion. 12 men, armed with heavy crossbows and silver-tipped spears. "Torin is taking no chances." "We don't fight them on their terms," Isolde said, a dark, calculating smile touching her lips. She pulled her bronze hairpin from her sleeve, looking back toward the ancient boundary stone that marked the forest border. "This forest responds to the blood of the first Alpha, my mother's blood." "Isolde, what are you going to do?" Kaelin asked, watching her with a mixture of awe and fierce protectiveness. "Trust me," she whispered. Isolde stepped forward onto a massive, icy rock shelf overhanging the canyon. She drew the sharp bronze pin across her palm, pressing her bloody hand directly against the ancient boundary stone. She spoke the high wolf command engraved in the cavern sanctuary. The ground beneath their feet groaned. A massive, resonant frequency hummed through the frost-covered trees. Suddenly, the unstable snowdrifts along the cliff tops fractured. A controlled avalanche of ice and snow roared down the cliff face, sweeping directly over the hidden ambush positions. Screams echoed across the valley as Torin's hidden assassins were buried beneath tons of cascading ice, their trap completely shattered before they could fire a single bolt. Kaelin let out a dark laugh of satisfaction, his golden eyes gleaming with pride. "You are truly magnificent, my queen." Without wasting another second, Kaelin grabbed her hand, and together they crossed the border stream, completing the trial of the Frostwood. They sprinted through the lower gates of Ironhold, catching the courtyard guards completely by surprise. The guards, believing the king and the prisoner had perished, stood frozen in shock as Kaelin and Isolde kicked open the heavy oak doors of the great hall. The scene inside was chaotic. Seated upon Kaelin's high throne was Elder Torin, wearing the royal mantle. Standing beside him was Lady Morwenna, dressed in velvet silk, holding a forged royal decree. "Members of the council," Torin was shouting to the assembled lords, "Alpha King Kaelin has fallen in the Frostwood. As acting regent, I hereby declare Lady Morwenna's daughter as sovereign ruler." "You declare nothing, traitor!" Kaelin's thundering voice roared across the hall, shattering the quiet like a thunderclap. Morwenna shrieked, dropping her glass goblet, which shattered on the flagstones. Torin bolted upright from the throne, his face draining of all color as if he had seen a ghost. Isolde stepped forward alongside Kaelin, throwing the Iron Shadow Beast medallion directly onto the center table before the gathered lords. "Elder Torin committed high treason," Isolde declared, her voice ringing clear and authoritative through the massive hall. "He used trained shadow beasts and elite mercenaries to attempt an assassination on the king inside the Frostwood, and Lady Morwenna financed the entire plot using stolen treasury funds." Torin's eyes darted around the hall, realizing the pack lords were turning against him. In a desperate, cowardly maneuver, Torin drew a hidden silver dagger from his robes and lunged directly at Isolde. "If I fall, the half-breed dies first," Torin screamed. Kaelin moved to step between them, but Isolde was faster. She ducked beneath Torin's flailing arm, grabbed his wrist, and twisted it hard using an armbar leverage technique. The dagger clattered to the floor, and Kaelin grabbed Torin by the throat, slamming the elder hard onto the cold marble floor. "It is over, Torin," Kaelin growled, his golden eyes flashing dangerously as his claws extended against the elder's neck. Just as the royal guards rushed forward to bind Torin and Morwenna in iron chains, the fortress war horns blared outside. 3 long, agonizing blasts. Commander Vane burst into the hall, his armor splattered with blood. "Your Grace, a massive army of southern rogue wolves has crossed our border. They are carrying Lady Morwenna's war banners, and they have breached the outer wall." Isolde's blood ran cold as she turned to look at Morwenna. The stepmother, even while bound in heavy chains, let out a villainous, chilling laugh. "You think you won, Isolde? I didn't just come to take your inheritance. I sold both our kingdoms to the southern rogue king weeks ago. Ironhold falls today." The thunderous blare of the fortress war horns shook the dust from the high-arched ceiling of the great hall. Outside, the sky turned a bruised volcanic purple as catapult fire rained down upon the outer bailey, sending burning embers and shattered granite cascading over the snow-covered courtyards. Lady Morwenna's laughter rang out like breaking glass against the stone walls, her chains rattling as she threw her head back. "Did you truly believe you could win, Isolde? You are a foolish child playing at politics. King Malachor of the Southern Rogues commands 10,000 claws. By midnight, your precious Ironhold will be a ruin, and your corpses will feed the crows." Elder Torin, still pinned beneath Kaelin's heavy iron grip, gaped at Morwenna in shock. "You brought Southern Rogues to our sacred mountain? Morwenna, you fool! They will slaughter us all, not just Kaelin." "Shut your treacherous mouth, Torin," Kaelin growled, his voice a dangerous, subterranean tremor. With a single fluid motion, Kaelin hauled Torin up by his collar and threw him toward Commander Vane. "Bind them both in cold silver chains and lock them in the lower cells. If either tries to escape during the assault, run them through." "At once, Your Grace," Vane barked, motioning for 6 armed guards to haul the screaming stepmother and the pale, trembling elder away into the shadows. Kaelin turned to Isolde, his golden eyes burning with a mixture of raw alpha intensity and fierce, unspoken terror for her safety. He grabbed her by her shoulders, his grip tight yet reverent. "Isolde, the catacombs beneath the sanctuary lead to the hidden northern pass. Take 4 of my best elite guards and flee now. I will hold the court and draw Malachor's main force into the canyon." Isolde looked at him, her blue eyes flashing with cold, unyielding resolve. She did not pull away. Instead, she pressed her hand against the dark leather over his chest, feeling the wild, rapid beat of his heart. "I am not running, Kaelin," she said, her voice cutting clearly through the rising din of battle outside. "I spent my entire life hiding in the shadows of my father's court, while Morwenna systematically pulled us apart. I will not abandon you, and I will not abandon this pack." "Isolde, Malachor is a butcher," Kaelin urged, his jaw tight. "He does not honor ancient pacts or noble trials. If the inner gate falls, the inner gate will not fall if we use our brains instead of merely brute strength," Isolde interrupted sharply, turning toward the stunned council of elders who remained cowering near the high dais. "Elders of Ironhold, look at me." The remaining 4 elders hesitated, their eyes darting nervously between the fierce human-blooded woman and their alpha king. "You spent 3 days calling for my execution based on lies," Isolde declared, stepping forward onto the raised platform. She reached into her tunic and pulled out the ancient silver pendant she had carried from the Frostwood sanctuary, the heirloom engraved with the pine tree intertwined with the crescent moon. "Look upon the mark of the first Alpha King. My mother was the last direct descendant of the lineage that built these very walls. By ancient law, my blood commands the hidden defense mechanisms of Ironhold Fortress." A collective murmur of awe swept through the elders. Elder Gareth, the oldest among them, stepped forward, his trembling hands reaching out to inspect the ancient runes on the medallion. "By the moon," Gareth breathed, his weathered eyes widening. "The sacred lineage, it was never lost. The blood of the first Alpha lives in her." "Then listen to your queen," Kaelin thundered, his voice echoing through the hall with absolute authority as he stepped to her side, placing his hand over hers on the hilt of his broad sword. "Every warrior to the inner battlements, we do not fight merely for Ironhold today. We fight for the true bloodline of the realm." A resounding cheer erupted from the guards and council members alike, their lingering doubts erased by the undeniable truth of Isolde's heritage and Kaelin's unwavering devotion to her. Within minutes, Isolde was at the high tactical map table in the command tower, pointing to the narrow choke points along the mountain fortress pass. "Malachor's rogues rely on numerical superiority and dark shadow fire," she explained to Vane and Kaelin as war horns continued to blare outside. "If we open the sluice gates above the lower canyon, The frozen mountain runoff will flood the outer trenches, freezing their siege engines solid before they can reach the inner timber gates. And the shadow beasts? Vane asked, his face tight with grim anticipation. Morwenna undoubtedly provided them with control medallions. I know how the control medallions are crafted, Isolde replied calmly, pulling her herbal pouch from her side. The control magic relies on dark nightshade oil to keep the beasts submissive to their handlers. If we light the brazier towers with sulfur and dried white sage, the smoke will break the spell instantly. The beasts will turn on Malicor's own handlers. Kaelin stared at her, a look of profound pride and fierce devotion shining in his amber eyes. He leaned down, catching her jaw in his hand, his thumb softly tracing her cheekbone. You are not just a survivor, Isolde. You were born to rule. Before Isolde could answer, a violent explosion rocked the command tower. The massive timber doors of the outer courtyard splintered into thousands of burning shards. They're through the outer wall, a scout screamed from the parapet. King Malicor himself is leading the vanguard. Through the dense smoke and falling snow of the courtyard, a giant, shadowy figure clad in jagged black armor stepped into the light, wielding a massive, double-headed battle axe. King Malicor of the Southern Rogues had arrived, flanked by hundreds of snarling, corrupted wolf warriors. Kaelin Bloodfang! Malicor's booming voice rang out across the bloodied snow of the courtyard. Bring out the girl and yield your crown, or I will turn your fortress into a mass grave. Kaelin drew his massive broadsword, the steel humming in the freezing air. He looked at Isolde one last time, his gaze soft and burning with absolute trust. Hold the high towers, my mate. I will cut the head off this snake. The lower courtyard of Ironhold had descended into a chaotic maelstrom of steel, fire, and blood. Kaelin leaped from the elevated balustrade into the thick of the battle, his alpha aura flaring in a dazzling wave of gold energy that sent 3 rogue attackers flying into the stone walls. His broadsword was a blur of lethal precision, carving a path of destruction straight toward Malicor. High above on the inner ramparts, Isolde moved with frantic, calculated speed. Guided by her instructions, the fortress archers hurled bundles of white sage and sulfur into the giant stone braziers lining the courtyard walls. Thick, aromatic white smoke billowed down into the canyon, sweeping across the battlefield like a spectral mist. Down in the snow, dozens of massive obsidian shadow beasts stopped mid-lunge. Their crimson eyes flickered, returning to a natural golden hue as the white sage smoke neutralized the submissive dark magic in their blood. With deafening, wild roars, the corrupted beasts turned violently upon Malicor's rogue handlers, shattering the enemy's front ranks in a frenzy of panic. Focus fire on the sluice gate winch, Isolde commanded the archers, pointing her bow toward the frozen mountain dam above the narrow pass. She drew her own bowstring back to her ear, aimed carefully, and released a fiery arrow straight into the dry timber ropes holding the main water gate. The rope snapped with a sound like a rifle shot. Thousands of gallons of freezing, slush-filled mountain water roared down the mountain canyon, hitting the rogue army's heavy siege towers with unstoppable force. The icy torrent swept away Malicor's supply lines and encased their heavy artillery in solid blocks of instant ice. It's working, Vane shouted from the parapets, watching the enemy forces fall into disarray. However, down on the central flagstones, the true nightmare was unfolding. King Malicor, wielding his giant battle axe with unnatural dark magic-infused strength, parried Kaelin's sword strike with a deafening screech of metal. The southern rogue king was a monstrous figure, his skin covered in glowing black runes that absorbed the impact of Kaelin's blows. Is that all the great Alpha King of Ironhold has to offer? Malicor mocked, swinging his heavy axe in a brutal arc that sliced through Kaelin's shoulder armor, drawing a gush of crimson blood. You weakened yourself for a human-blooded half-breed. You are unfit to wear the crown of the North. Kaelin stumbled back into the snow, his breathing ragged as black veins began to bloom around his fresh wound. Malicor's axe was coated in dark steel poison. Kaelin! Isolde's voice echoed across the courtyard, seeing the man who had risked everything for her on the verge of collapse. Isolde did not hesitate. Leaving the safety of the archer towers, she sprinted down the stone spiral staircase, wielding a short silver hunting blade she had taken from the armory. "Stay back, girl," Malachor roared, raising his axe above the wounded Kaelin for a final, decapitating blow. "Your father died pleading for his life, and you will die right beside your pathetic alpha." "My father died because he was betrayed by cowards," Isolde shouted, vaulting off a fallen wooden wagon and landing gracefully on the slick stones between Malachor and Kaelin. Malachor sneered, swinging his axe downward at Isolde with terrifying speed. But Isolde had studied the movements of larger fighters her entire life. Instead of trying to block the massive blow, she ducked low beneath the swing, sliding across the bloodied ice. As she passed beneath his guard, she pulled a small leather pouch from her belt and threw a handful of crushed silver leaf powder directly into Malachor's face. The potent herbal dust hit the rogue king's eyes and nostrils. Because he had consumed dark potion herbs to boost his strength, the pure silver leaf caused an immediate, agonizing chemical reaction. Malachor dropped his axe, screaming in agony as he clutched his burning eyes, staggering backward blindly. "Kaelin, now!" Isolde yelled. Kaelin, pushing through the agonizing burn of the dark steel poison, gathered every ounce of his remaining alpha strength. With a primal roar that reverberated through the very bedrock of the mountain, Kaelin rose from the snow and drove his broadsword straight through Malachor's chest plate. The giant rogue king froze. The black runes on his skin faded into ash as he collapsed hard onto the blood-soaked flagstones, dead before he hit the ground. Seeing their king slain and their shadow beasts turned against them, the remaining southern rogue warriors threw down their weapons in total surrender, dropping to their knees in the snow. Breathing heavily, Kaelin dropped his blade and collapsed onto one knee, his hand clutching his poisoned shoulder. Isolde rushed to his side, sliding into the snow and wrapping her arms tightly around his trembling chest. "I have you, Kaelin. I'm here. Stay with me." Kaelin looked up at her through hazy, pain-filled eyes. A soft, breathless laugh escaped his lips as he reached up to cup her cheek with his bloodied hand. "I told you. My wolf knew. You were no helpless victim." Before Isolde could answer, a high-pitched screech echoed from the shadows of the lower catacomb entrance across the yard. Lady Morwenna, having slipped her silver chains during the chaos of the battle, was dragging herself out of the dark doorway, holding a loaded crossbow aimed directly at Isolde's back. "If I cannot have the silver pine, no one will," Morwenna screamed, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged insanity as her fingers squeezed the trigger of the crossbow. Twang! The heavy iron bolt whistled through the freezing air. Isolde moved to shield Kaelin with her own body, but Commander Vane appeared out of nowhere, stepping into the line of fire. The iron bolt struck Vane's thick steel chest plate with a loud clang, bouncing harmlessly off his heavy armor. Without a second thought, Vane sprinted across the stone courtyard, grabbing Morwenna by her fine velvet collar and slamming her hard against the stone wall, disarming her in a single, fluid stroke. "Your reign of terror is over, Lady Morwenna," Vane growled, snapping cold silver lock shackles back around her wrists. Isolde stood up slowly, stepping over the icy stones until she stood directly in front of her stepmother. Morwenna glared up at her with pure venom, spitting at Isolde's feet. "You think you've won, you miserable wretch?" Morwenna hissed. "You are half human. The Pack Lords will never truly bow to you." "The Pack Lords do not bow to my human blood, Morwenna," Isolde said, her voice dropping into a quiet, icy tone that commanded total silence across the bloodied courtyard. "They bow to justice, something you destroyed the moment you poisoned my father and sold our people to rogues." Isolde turned to the gathered soldiers and council members who were filling the courtyard. "Take her to the deep silver mines. By order of the bloodline of the first Alpha, Lady Morwenna and Elder Torin shall spend the rest of their days working the cold earth to pay for the lives lost today. They will never see the sun again." The royal guards dragged the screaming, cursing stepmother away into the depths of the fortress, closing the heavy iron doors behind them forever. 2 weeks later, the morning sun rose over Ironhold Fortress, illuminating a world transformed. The snow-capped peaks glistened like crushed diamonds, and the scent of fresh pine and clean mountain air filled the clear blue sky. The damage from the siege was already being repaired, with Silver Pine refugees and Ironhold warriors working side by side in peace. Isolde stood on the high balcony of the Sun Tower, wearing a magnificent gown of icy blue velvet lined with white fur. Her dark hair was braided with delicate silver wires and pine needles, the traditional mantle of her mother's ancestral house. Behind her, soft, deliberate footsteps echoed on the stone floor. Kaelin stepped out onto the balcony. The black veins from the dark steel poison were completely gone, cured by Isolde's expert herbal treatments. He was dressed in his royal alpha robes, but his golden eyes were soft, stripped of the terrifying hostility he once showed the world. He stopped a few paces behind her, looking out at the vast, unified landscape. "The Council of Elders has finalized the treaties," Kaelin said softly, his low voice vibrating with deep emotion. "The Silver Pine territory and Ironhold are officially unified under a single sovereign crown. Your father's lands are safe, Isolde. Your people are free." Isolde turned around to face him, her heart beating with a sweet, aching intensity. "And what of the blood pact my father signed?" Kaelin reached into his tunic and pulled out the original parchment, the blood scroll that had bound them together. He held it out to her, along with a lit candle from the sconce on the wall. "You are no longer a bound charge, Isolde," Kaelin said, his voice trembling slightly with raw vulnerability. "You have restored your family's honor, saved my pack, and proven yourself the rightful ruler of this realm. You owe me nothing. If you wish to take your birthright and rule the Silver Pine alone, I will give you your freedom today." Isolde looked down at the parchment, then up into Kaelin's golden eyes. She saw no pride, no arrogance, no alpha dominance in his gaze. Only unconditional love, respect, and a willingness to sacrifice his own happiness for her choice. Slowly, Isolde reached out, but instead of taking the scroll to burn it, she gently folded Kaelin's fingers back over the parchment, closing his hand. "You still do not understand, Kaelin Bloodfang," Isolde whispered, stepping close enough to rest her hands on his broad chest. "My stepmother gave me to you as a punishment. She thought she was sending me to a monster." Kaelin's breath hitched in his throat as his large hand rose to gently frame her face. "And what did she send you to?" "She sent me to my home," Isolde murmured, a radiant smile illuminating her face. "She sent me to the only man who saw my strength when everyone else saw a pawn. She sent me to my true mate." Kaelin let out a low, breathless sound that was half laugh, half groan. He pulled her flush against his body, his arms wrapping around her waist with possessive, reverent warmth. He leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a deep, passionate kiss that sealed their bond forever. A kiss born of survival, trust, and unyielding love. High above the great hall of Ironhold, the war banners were raised into the mountain breeze. A silver pine tree intertwined with a crescent moon, framed by the golden claws of the Bloodfang Alpha. Isolde had stepped into Ironhold in heavy iron chains as a condemned prisoner. She stood now as the undisputed Alpha Queen of the North, loved uncontrollably by the king who had risked his life to set her free. Isolde's journey from a chained, betrayed outcast to the undisputed Alpha Queen of the North reminds us that true strength isn't born from titles or power, but from resilience, justice, and unwavering love. Kaelin showed us that a real alpha doesn't seek to conquer his mate, but to stand beside her as an equal, proving his devotion through sacrifice and trust. Together, they turned a cruel punishment into a legendary destiny that unified a divided realm forever. If you love this dramatic, emotional tale of betrayal, redemption, and uncontrollable alpha love, please hit that like button and comment your favorite scene below. Did you love Isolde's fierce tactical brilliance, or Kaelin's fierce devotion? Don't forget to share this video with fellow fantasy romance lovers and subscribe to the channel for more addictive, high-stakes storytelling.